Well, I suppose I could say it's certainly been a challenging year, but if I were to say that, I'd be misleading everybody, because the truth is that in aviation, every year is challenging, let alone when you're the smaller player in the market and you're trying to break a monopoly and you're trying to grow at the same time. I think I'd probably phrase it as an evolutionary year, the next phase of our evolution. We went through the first stage, which was repositioning the business. The second stage obviously was the service, the product and brand and all the rest of it. Then the growth, because we have doubled in size in that time frame. And so now it's all about getting the balance sheet in order and getting the strength and financials behind the business.
Didn't lose the doubled in size in the middle of that sentence. That's massive.
Well, when I think about it, we had about 78 or 79 aeroplanes and we had about 6,000 staff. We now have almost 160 aeroplanes, about 10,000 staff. You look at our Velocity program, we had just under 2 million members. We now have 6.5 million members, and they're still growing at 2,500 a day. So it's the business still has momentum, and it's not till you stop and you compare the numbers that you realise that we're actually, I must look at it, but I think we're about 2 or 3, certainly twice, but probably 3 times as big as Ansett was when it went down. Oh, you read that paper article this morning too. Well, I believe in, if you can start your day with a good laugh, right, it gets you in the right mood. And that certainly got a good laugh. I mean, the truth is that irrespective of what the paper says, the Qantas Sales Act restriction of 25% of one foreign airline and 35% of any number of airlines was lifted about 2 years ago. The only real restriction that's there is 49% foreign ownership, which, by the way, we have as well, except we've structured the business in such a way that our domestic business can be fully owned, and they can do that too if they want. So I was quite amused when I read it. As I said, always good to get a laugh at the start of the day. Yeah. Oh, look, it's so important on so many fronts. And I know Sarah's here, and I hope she doesn't mind me sharing some of the conversations that history. So I'll tell a little story, if I may. I'd been in the job about a year or so, and I was talking to James Hogan, who's the CEO of Etihad, and a good friend. I've known him for 30-something years. And he had just told me that he was trying to do a deal with Qantas, but it didn't work out. And so we both agreed that, why don't we meet in Singapore and have a chat and see if we can strike something. We met in Singapore 2 weeks later, I think it was, with our management team. We met for 2 hours, had a nice lunch, sandwiches, etc. Shook hands, did the deal, and it was really the most important deal for us at the time, because it totally gave us the gravitas, if you will, or the credibility that we were a serious player. When someone like Etihad gets involved, you know that you're a serious player. And the rest is sort of history. The relationship has developed and it's got stronger, and they bought part of the company, and so it goes on. So I suppose the importance is on 2 sides, both the personal side, because we've known each other for so long, but also on the professional and business side. And frankly, they've been enormous help to us, as have the other shareholders too, of course. Look, I think if you're talking aviation or tourism for that matter, and you're talking about Australia, there is no doubt China is the future. There is absolutely no doubt. And no matter how much you try to destroy that logic, it doesn't hold true. Now, I'll give you some examples. Now, if you look at the domestic market for the last 30 or 40 years has been growing on an average of about 4 or 5%. In other words, every year, an average of about 4% more people travel domestically. That's been the case for, as I said, 3 decades or so, except for in the last year or two, where it's been pretty flat. In fact, in some cases, it's been slightly minus. So you say, well, the Australian market is probably not going to grow at anything greater than the average anyway, let alone what it's growing now. You then look at the outbound travel from Australia, and yep, that's growing a little bit, but it's never going to set the world on fire, particularly when your currency is weak, and so on. And then you look at inbound, and you say, well, okay, what about inbound? The one place that stands out is China. Why? Because if you look at their position currently in the inbound market, they are the largest inbound market for Australia. And it was only a few years ago that it was America. Now, America still has something like, and it's a very important market, I think from memory, 700, close to 800,000 people a year. China finished last year 1.2 million and is growing at 22%. This is going to be the future for the next decade for tourism. And so if we want to grow as a business, we have to feature in that China market. And that's the intention that we have and why we will, and we want to, over the next 12 months or so, fly to both Hong Kong and Beijing and some other places, which we won't talk about today, because I know you'll keep it to yourself, but just in case you don't. Well, I think the first thing is you need to have a reason for doing it. And the reason for us doing it was pretty obvious. If we didn't do it, we'd be out of business. So, you know, what is it? Necessity is the mother of all inventions, or whatever the saying is. And so we had really no way to go. I memean, picture the history. You have Virgin Blue, that was an incredibly successful carrier, with the demise of Ansett, was able to grow to 70-odd aeroplanes, but the market here is finite, and it can only grow to a certain point. So it started changing its model a little bit in the hope of attracting a bigger market. Wasn't quite succeeding. Cost base had gone up, but the revenue line wasn't following. And so it had nowhere to go. It could either go backwards and be a low-cost carrier, which would have been very difficult, because how do you go to everybody and say, hey guys, you're all going to take a 20% haircut on your pay, and you know, you just can't do that. Or the other option was jump in. And if you jump in, you've got to go in with your eyes open, because you are going to fight the strongest, you know, one of the best carriers in the world, and they have never given an inch for anybody. And if you look at history, every carrier that's challenged Qantas in this market has failed. There has not been one that succeeded. So how do you do that? Now, you could take the Harvard Business School approach and say, here is a 10-point plan that says, you know what, first, let's get the capital in the company because the balance sheet is shot. Second, let's do a nice plan. And thirdly, let's put these systems in place. Fourthly, let's, you know, do all this and this and this, put all the structure in place. And then lastly, go out and announce it and do it. Now, if we had done that, first of all, it would have taken so much time, even if we could convince people, that Qantas would have squashed us. Absolutely. And rightfully so too. So we had to do everything back to front. We had to start from the end and work forward. We had to come out and say, we're going to change all of this. Here's how we're going to look like. Everybody laughs at you because they say, are you serious? What drugs are you on? And you say, well, that's good if they don't believe us, because it gives us a year of cover that we can get things done whilst everyone is, you know, looking the other way. And that's exactly what happened, because what we know, or what I believed then and I still believe now, is that in any industry that is dominated by one player, it doesn't matter what industry it is, it can be mineral water, it could be anything, that near monopolist or monopolist usually goes through three phases when a new entrant comes in. You know, first thing that happens is a new entrant comes in and the incumbent is in denial. They say, oh, yeah, little pipsqueak, they're never going to succeed, they've got no money, they've got no this, they've got no that, just ignore them, they'll go away, right? So they go through the denial stage, but of course, as time goes on, if you succeed for that first year, you wake them up, and then they go into the realisation phase that says, I nearly said a bad word, damn, these guys are actually getting somewhere, they're starting to cut our lunch, quick, throw the kitchen sink at them, bombard them, just absolutely smash them. And of course, when you do that, there's collateral damage. You know, and usually because you're the bigger guy, for every dollar one loses, the other one loses twice as much, or whatever the numbers are. And then there's the third phase, which is the realisation phase, where they say, well, you know what, we're not going to get rid of this mob. Looks like they've survived, they've earned their right to exist. Let's just accept that this is now a two-player market and get on with our lives. And we had to go through that. But the real danger was, would we get through that second phase? And I'm pleased to say we did. So I can't give you a 10-point plan other than to say, get the one from your universities or whatever, tip it on its head, and that's how we did it. Look, again, there isn't an easy answer. I mean, what do staff want? What do you want? What do your kids want? They want hope. They want to be able to be taken to a better place. And I keep saying management's all about creating hope. That's all it is. The rest kind of follows. And I think that, you know, fundamentally, I think that if you've got the people power behind you, Mel, and you've got the staff on side, the rest of the company will either follow or they go out. And, you know, when you've got 6,000 staff, as we did then, you need 5,950 of them to follow you. The other 50, or whatever the number of management is, if they don't follow the change, then you change the management. But it's very, very difficult to change 5,950 staff. So the only way you can get them to really come across and support you is if you can describe to them in their language and something meaningful to them that you're going to take them through and take them to that better place. How do you do that? Now, you can write memos, sorry, you don't do memos anymore. What do you do? Emails, that's right. You can write emails, you can have big forums like this, that's all great, you can do that. But nothing works more than a one-on-one or a one-on-3 or a one-on-4, and it's all about that communication. And if they accept you, and they accept what you say, and they believe in you, then you're there. That's really the heart. You capture the heart. Don't worry about the mind. The mind will follow. The trouble in a lot of companies, big companies, is they go after the mind, and you might attract the mind, but if you don't catch their heart, you're wasting your time. Okay, if I got time to tell a little story here.
Please do.
So my PA, she's been with me 22 years or something. She calls me, and she got a call from Danielle, who's here today at a PA, and they said, "We've got Ray Hadley on air." You all know Ray. He wants to talk to you now on air. And of course, the first thing your mind goes to is, oh, what have we done? We've messed something up, we've upset somebody. And Ray's a good guy. And I said, yeah, okay, fine, I'll talk to him, put him on, expecting to hear a problem. When you go on air at short notice, usually that's what it is. And Ray said, look, John, you're on air, and I want to read a letter to you. I think, oh, here he comes. And, my name is Leslie, whatever the person's name was. I was flying Virgin from Sydney to Canberra. There were terrible storms at Canberra. Canberra Airport was shut. We couldn't get away. I was stuck here at Sydney Airport. And I'm thinking, oh no, this is not looking good so far. So I'm waiting for the punchline. And I broke down in tears and, all the rest of it. And then this nice Virgin staff member came up and said, look, we can't do much about it. The airport is shut. We can't fly in there. And I didn't have anywhere to go and all the rest of it. Didn't have any money because my husband was in Canberra, and I was meeting him there to go to a special show. And I think it was Clearance. No, what was that pop group? Not Clearance. Yeah, anyway, whoever it was, shows you my age, as pop group. So, and then goes on to tell the story that this ground staff went to the handy bank, withdrew some money from her own account, gave her the money and said, look, buy yourself something to eat, go in the lounge, do whatever you want to do. Don't worry, I know you've missed that show, but I've researched it, and there's a show that they're touring, and they're doing a show in Adelaide. And what we'll do is we'll buy you 2 tickets for that show. We'll give you 2 return tickets to Adelaide. Enjoy it, right? And this woman obviously just melted, right? And quite rightly, and was overcome by emotion. And Ray's reading this, and because you imagine me, I was petrified like this, and all of a sudden, yes, Ray, well, we always do that. But that's the sort of stuff that you can't buy, you can't pay for. Well, we're used to people laughing at us, but it was very interesting because Tiger Air was about to go out of business. And business logic, your university, textbook answer is let it go out of business because you'll have one player less. But the worry that I had was that if they went out of business, Jetstar would fill that space. And the moment Jetstar filled that space with capacity, etc., we would be squeezed even more. So we couldn't afford for it to go out of business. So the lesser of 2 evils was to buy it. Now, you buy it on the assumption that you think you can do something with it. And at the time, it had previously been grounded, was losing a lot of money, it wasn't a good look. And again, if you did a proper analysis, you wouldn't have done it. But you knew that you couldn't afford to make it fail. So the question was, could you make it work? And we believed we could. It was a long shot, but we thought we could. We knew that it would take till 2017, end of 2017, to make it profitable. But we would have a go. Pleased to say it was actually profitable at the end of last financial year, and its ratings have gone up. Its on-time performance now is way ahead of Jetstar's, like by light years, and its customer service is too. So, again, people laugh, but we like taking on a challenge, and it worked. Yeah, for the next 5 years, that's where the focus will be.
Any more questions down the front end of the room? I can hear you guys down there. Yeah, we've got one here. I'll lean over. I can reach you.
Hello, how are you? Just wondering, when would you decide that you were interested in the aviation industry? Was it like as a boy or later on?
Well, I've never been interested in the aviation industry. I landed on it by accident rather than by design. I suppose it was design a little bit. I was doing my 12th year school, and I really hated school, and there was no way I was going to go to university. And most of the people that know me know the story, so I might as well say it. But I went to see a movie with a friend of mine. It was a James Bond movie, and there was a newsreel before, and there was Rio Carnival, you know, and two 17-year-old boys sitting there watching these half-naked ladies on the screen. We said, we got to go to Rio. How the hell are we going to get to Rio? You know, we can't afford to go to Rio. I didn't even know where Rio was. And then I realised that a friend of my dad's worked at Qantas, and he got rebated tickets, and I said, that's how we can afford to. I'll get a job at Qantas. And I did. I applied for a job as a mail boy, and didn't get it the first time, got it the second time, and that's how I landed in aviation. I still haven't been to Rio. I have no intention of going, but that's, so it was really, you know, sometimes fate kind of just opens doors and you don't even know you're walking through them until you wake up 45 years later, and there you are. Yeah.
Can I ask one more? And I'm hoping it'll help a lot of people in the room. You work in a very volatile industry. How do you manage the ups and downs? How do you channel that and keep going when there are so many?
Look, you can only control what you can control, and you know everything affects aviation. I mean, pick one subject that doesn't impact aviation. If a chicken sneezes in Hong Kong, someone blurts out bird flu, and the world stops travelling, right? So your revenue line is shot. Then you got currency, you got fuel. So what you try to do is, as best as you can, hedge your currency and your fuel. That's number one. The treasury function in an airline is the most important. You know, a lot of airlines have lost a lot of money or gone broke because their treasury function hasn't been strong. And then the rest, you really just adapt as you see the market unfolding. It is, I reckon, one of the things that actually excites me about it, because no 2 days are the same. Mm.
Any more questions? Yep.
Hi, I'm Ned Manoon here. So just wondering, there we go. With regards to the new airport, Western Sydney Airport at Badgerys Creek, what does that mean for air travel in Sydney, especially when it operates without a curfew? And I guess how important is it to actually have a train line there from day one? And if you have any views on a preferred route?
Well, I could talk for an hour on Badgerys Creek, and you probably wouldn't like half the things I'll say, but I'll say a few things. First of all, let's start with what we have today, which is mascot, Kingsford Smith. Any country in the world, now I don't care where you look, any country in the world that has an airport 7 kilometres or 7.5 from the city, they would kill for it. Think about London, think about New York, think about Rome. You know, those airports are so far out of the city. Here we have a jewel in Kingsford Smith, and what do? We limit it. We limit it to 80 movements an hour when it could quite easily take another 10 or 20 or 30 or 40. We limit the hours of operation. Houses have always been around it. So we're saying, okay, we can't grow Kingsford Smith anymore, therefore we need a second airport. Fair enough. If the politics of that are too hard, no problem. Let's start a second airport. So what do you want in that second airport? Well, the first thing you don't want is a mini-me of Kingsford Smith. You don't want a replica of that. You want an airport that is modular in size. In other words, it's a low cost, I don't mean low cost as in low cost carrier, I mean a lower cost infrastructure modular terminal that you can build it as time goes on. You want an airport that has planning and already in existence plans for a second runway, so that you don't have a debate 10 years later about knocking down houses to build a second runway. And you need an airport that particularly fits at Badgerys. You need an airport that'll have a freight facility, because 15% of all the freight that comes in via Mascot goes on trucks to further west than Badgerys. So you want to get those trucks off the road. You need a fast rail link, absolutely. But what people forget is that you need a road. You know, it's great to have a train, but how many of you go to the airport by train here? I know I don't. So you need a road. There's no point in just talking about a railway. And, you know, and so on and so on and so on. Look, yeah, we do need a second airport. 2025 is as good a year as any if it's done by then. But I do think, though, that there are some inefficiencies at Kingsford Smith that could be unlocked, certainly in the meantime, until that's built.
Is it on? Yeah, just a question for the both of you. How do you think the Giants will go in next week's preliminary final
We are so going to win, and then we're going to, through the grand final, we're going to win that too.
Okay, so can I relay a conversation Mel and I had sitting there? Now, in front of 700 people, can I say this? If the GWS gets to the final, Tony and David, we will decorate the interior of one of the aircrafts to Melbourne in orange and, you know, whatever other bloody colour you got. And we're sure it's going to get there.
I actually asked if he could spray paint the outside, but he said that was a little bit over the budget. So we're going to do the inside, but that's okay. Happy with that. That'll be fantastic.
Los Angeles, for example. Los Angeles, let's say, even Singapore, Abu Dhabi, I'll say. They are airports that run huge hubs, right? So you fly into that and then you farm out. And to get slots during certain time is very difficult. And unfortunately, what drives an airline operating in and out of Australia to those destinations is whatever slots they can get in Sydney instead of the other way around. Because you know that if you can get a good time slot, let's say you got a good slot in LA that leaves at, I don't know, whatever time it might be, say 7 p.m., 6 p.m., something like that, you get to Sydney too early and you can't land. So even though the demand from a customer perspective, it's better to leave LA at 7 than it is at 10, so it dictates the through line. But I tell you what is more important here, and curfew, look, I'm a bit sympathetic to it, so I can kind of understand that. But what I can't understand is the 80 movements per hour. And what a lot of people don't know is that although you can only have 80 landings and takeoffs an hour, it's actually broken by 15-minute lots. So every 15 minutes, you can only have 20. Now, if one 15-minute lot, you only have 10, you don't pick up the other 10 in the next 15 minutes. So it is rare that you have 80 movements an hour, because in one of the quarters, you probably won't. Now, just by freeing up that and saying we won't break it by quarters, we'll just go by the hour, please go by the 80s, that in itself would improve things. So there are so many things that could be improved before you even get to curfew, you know, and that's, I think, a shame. But understand the politics, and that's okay.
Can I please ask everyone to put their hands together? A round of applause. Thank you, Mr. John Borghetti, for joining us today. Really, really appreciate it.
And to Mel.